house nice, and instead of thanking me, what do you think he said? Said he wished I wouldn't fill up the writing desk with them when he wanted to use it. And there was a perfectly frightful fuss one evening because I'd spilled one of the vases over some papers of his. It was all nonsense, really, because they weren't anything to do with his work. He had some silly idea of writing a book in those days, as if he could. I cured him of that in the end. No, Hilda, you must listen to me. The trouble I went to entertaining. Robert's idea was that he'd just slink off by himself every now and then to see what he called his old friends, and leave me to amuse myself. But I knew from the first that those friends were doing him no good. No, Robert, said I, your friends are now mine. It is my duty to have them here, however tired I am, and however little we can afford it. You'd have thought that would have been enough, but they did come for a bit. That is where I had to use a certain amount of tact. A woman who has her wits about her can always drop in a word here and there. I wanted Robert to see them against a different background. They weren't quite at their ease somehow in my drawing-room, nor at their best. I couldn't help laughing sometimes. Of course, Robert was uncomfortable while the treatment was going on, but it was all for his own good in the end. None of that set were friends of his any longer by the end of the first year. And then he got the new job, a great step up. But what do you think? Instead of realizing that we now had a chance to spread out a bit, all he said was, "Well, now, for God's sake, let's have some peace." That nearly finished me. I nearly gave him up altogether, but I knew my duty. I've always done my duty. You can't believe the work I had getting him to agree to a bigger house, and then finding a house. I wouldn't have grudged it one scrap if only he'd taken it in the right spirit, if only he'd seen the fun of it all. If he'd been a different sort of man, it would have been fun meeting him on the doorstep as he came back from the office and saying, "Come along, Bobbs, no time for dinner tonight. I've just heard of a house out near Watford, and I've got the keys, and we can get there and back by 1 o'clock. But with him, it was perfect misery, Hilda, for by this time your wonderful Robert was turning into the sort of man who cares about nothing but food. When I got him into the new house at last, yes, I know. It was a little more than we could really afford at the moment, but all sorts of things were opening out before him, and, of course, I began to entertain properly. No more of his sort of friends, thank you. I was doing it all for his sake. Every useful friend he ever made was due to me. Naturally, I had to dress well. They ought to have been the happiest years of both our lives. If they weren't, he had no one but himself to thank. Oh, he was a maddening man, simply maddening. He just set himself to get old and silent and grumpy, just sank into himself. He could have looked years younger if he'd taken the trouble. He needn't have walked with a stoop. I'm sure I warned him about that often enough. He was the most miserable host. Whenever we gave a party, everything rested on my shoulders. Robert was simply a wet blanket. As I said to him, and if I said it once, I said it 100 times, he hadn't always been like that. There had been a time when he took an interest in all sorts of things, and had been quite ready to make friends. "What on earth is coming over you?" I used to say. But no, he just didn't answer at all. He would sit staring at me with his great big eyes. I came to hate a man with dark eyes, and, I know it now, just hating me. That was my reward. After all I'd done, sheer, wicked, senseless hatred, at the very moment when he was a richer man than he'd ever dreamed of being. As I used to say to him, "Robert, you're simply letting yourself go to seed." The younger men who came to the house, it wasn't my fault if they liked me better than my old bear of a husband, used to laugh at him. I did my duty to the very end. I forced him to take exercise. That was really my chief reason for keeping a Great Dane. I kept on giving parties. I took him for the most wonderful holidays. I saw that he didn't drink too much. Even when things became desperate, I encouraged him to take up his writing again. It couldn't do any harm by then. How could I help it if he did have a nervous breakdown in the end? My conscience is clear. I've done my duty by him, if ever a woman has. So you see why it would be impossible to... And yet I don't know. I believe I have changed my mind. I'll make them a fair offer, Hilda. I will not meet him if it means just meeting him and no more. But if I'm given a free hand, I'll take charge of him again. I will take up my burden once more, but I must have a free hand. With all the time one would have here, I believe I could make something of him, somewhere quite to ourselves. Wouldn't that be a good plan? He's not fit to be on his own. Put me in charge of him. He wants firm handling. I know him better than you do. What's that? No, give him to me, do you hear? Don't consult him, just give him to me. I'm his wife, aren't I? I was only beginning. There's lots of things I still want to do with him. No, listen, Hilda, please. I'm so miserable. I must have someone to do things to. It's simply frightful down there. No one minds about me at all. I can't alter them. It's dreadful to see them all sitting about and not be able to do anything with them. Give him back to me. Why should he have everything his own way? It's no good for him. It isn't right. It's not fair. I want Robert. What right have you to keep him from me? I hate you. How can I pay him out if you won't let me have him?" The ghost, which had towered up like a dying candle flame, snapped suddenly. A sour, dry smell lingered in the air for a moment, and then there was no ghost to be seen. Chapter 11. One of the most painful meetings we witnessed was between a woman's ghost and a bright spirit who had apparently been her brother. They must have met only a moment before we ran across them, for the ghost was just saying in a tone of unconcealed disappointment, "Oh, Reginald, it's you, is it?" "Yes, dear," said the spirit. "I know you expected someone else. I hope you can be a little glad to see even me for the present." "I did think Michael would have come," said the ghost, and then, almost fiercely, "He is here, of course?" "He's there, far up in the mountains." "Why hasn't he come to meet me? Didn't he know?" "My dear, don't worry. It will all come right presently. It wouldn't have done. Not yet. He wouldn't be able to see or hear you as you are at present. You'd be totally invisible to Michael, but we'll soon build you up." "I should have thought if you can see me, my own son could." "It doesn't always happen like that. You see, I have specialized in this sort of work." "Oh, it's work, is it?" snapped the ghost. Then, after a pause, "Well, when am I going to be allowed to see him?" "There's no question of being allowed, Pam. As soon as it's possible for him to see you, of course he will. You need to be thickened up a bit." "How?" said the ghost. The monosyllable was hard and a little threatening. "I'm afraid the first step is a hard one," said the spirit. "But after that you'll go on like a house on fire. You will become solid enough for Michael to perceive you when you learn to want someone else besides Michael. I don't say more than Michael, not as a beginning. That will come later. It's only the little germ of a desire for God that we need to start the process." "Oh, you mean religion and all that sort of thing? This is hardly the moment. And from you, of all people. Well, never mind. I'll do whatever's necessary. What do you want me to do?" "Come on. The sooner I begin it, the sooner they'll let me see my boy. I'm quite ready." "But, Pam, do think. Don't you see you are not beginning at all as long as you are in that state of mind? You're treating God only as a means to Michael. But the whole thickening treatment consists in learning to want God for his own sake." "You wouldn't talk like that if you were a mother." "You mean if I were only a mother. But there is no such thing as being only a mother. You exist as Michael's mother only because you first exist as God's creature. That relation is older and closer. No, listen, Pam. He also loves. He also has suffered. He also has waited a long time." "If he loved me, he'd let me see my boy. If he loved me, why did he take away Michael from me? I wasn't going to say anything about that, but it's pretty hard to forgive, you know." "But he had to take Michael away, partly for Michael's sake." "I'm sure I did my best to make Michael happy. I gave up my whole life." "Human beings can't make one another really happy for long. And secondly, for your sake. He wanted your merely instinctive love for your child — tigresses share that, you know — to turn into something better. He wanted you to love Michael as he understands love. You cannot love a fellow creature fully till you love God. Sometimes this conversion can be done while the instinctive love is still gratified, but there was, it seems, no chance of that in your case. The instinct was uncontrolled and fierce and monomaniac. Ask your daughter, or your husband. Ask your own mother. You haven't once thought of her. The only remedy was to take away its object. It was a case for surgery. When that first kind of love was thwarted, then there was just a chance that in the loneliness, in the silence, something else might begin to grow." "This is all nonsense, cruel and wicked nonsense. What right have you to say things like that about mother love? It is the highest and holiest feeling in human nature." Pam. No natural feelings are high or low, holy or unholy in themselves. They are all holy when God's hand is on the rein. They all go bad when they set up on their own and make themselves into false gods.
My love for Michael would never have gone bad, not if we'd lived together for millions of years.
You are mistaken, and you must know. Haven't you met, down there, mothers who have their sons with them in hell? Does their love make them happy?
If you mean people like the Guthrie woman and her dreadful Bobby, of course not. I hope you're not suggesting... If I had Michael, I'd be perfectly happy, even in that town. I wouldn't be always talking about him till everyone hated the sound of his name, which is what Winifred Guthrie does about her brat. I wouldn't quarrel with people for not taking enough notice of him and then be furiously jealous if they did. I wouldn't go about whining and complaining that he wasn't nice to me, because, of course, he would be nice. Don't you dare to suggest that Michael could ever become like the Guthrie boy. There are some things I won't stand.
What you have seen in the Guthries is what natural affection turns to in the end, if it will not be converted.
It's a lie.